So when you called me yesterday, it was almost like you were doing spycraft, where you were like sneaking around trying to find that 8-minute window to sort of give me a download on the story and like whispering in the hallways and whatnot. That was like, that made it even more fun to get the feedback from you, that you were like taking a break and just trying to find an unobtrusive place to like give me good feedback in the 8 free minutes you had in the day. So thank you for spending your break time, giving me feedback on the story. I appreciate that.
Well, it's spycraft just because, working at a college, there's just so many kids around. And I've never been a big, like, phone in public person. And in the actual work that I have, we have, like, a very big production in that is a lot of bells and whistles. So while I'm not working for that production, I'm still in the office at the center of all of the action happening around. So, yeah, I just wanted to try and give you feedback because I knew you were very excited about having written a strong follow-up, having edited it and felt as good as you do about it. Correct?
Yeah, it's exciting. I don't know how to explain it to people who aren't me, but I'm like super excited to be writing again. It just wasn't fun for like 2 decades. The idea of writing wasn't fun, and now it is. And I think it's because I've been going back and reading a lot of my old work, stuff from the 90s that I was actually really trying to publish. And a lot of it is so bad that I'm embarrassed, and I think I might delete some of it. Like, I don't want people, I die of a heart attack, and they're like, oh, let's look at his file. I'm sure there's a rich treasure trove of complete garbage. I feel like I'm watching a toddler start to walk. And it's like, man, I really thought I was further along than I actually was. And I'm quite embarrassed now that I think back at my hubris, and I'm very sheepish about it. Because I'm looking at this work going, well, here's what you could do differently. And here's the thing. Let me ask you this, Tim. So I've got a few stories that when I read them from the past, 25, 30 years ago, I'm reading them going, well, this isn't half bad. It's not done. And it's bereft of emotion, but it's not bad. I think I might be able to do something with this. Here's my question to you, Tim. Should I? That was 30 years ago, and it would take a lot of work to rehabilitate it. Should I go back and like tinker with these old stories, or should I start fresh with new stuff?
Well, I think, yes and no. I mean, if it's a story that really resonates with you, if it's something that you feel like you still can give, I'm saying a modern voice. We had talked about a couple of the things that I had written, had the same sort of like, oh boy, what was well, it looks like I was really racing to finish this one. And I think that if it resonates with you, if it's still a story that you think can be told, that should be told, then yeah. One of the problems I got into was that I continually went backwards. And so I was making no forward progress because I wasn't experimenting with anything new. I wasn't trying to do any reading outside of the normal things that I would read. I wasn't trying to, gain new information and translate that to the page. I was just like, let me take this one paragraph and rewrite it for the umpteenth thousandth time. We talked before when we were talking about technology. I had that iPad app that was the Tom Hanks keyboard, the typewriter emulator.
Yeah.
And it acted like a real typewriter in that it was very difficult to go back and do any editing with it. It was like if you had to go back and edit, you really had to like exit out like you would on a real typewriter. And that forced me to move forward. So I think you have all of these years of experience. You can look back on these stories with fresh eyes from 20, 30 years ago. And I think it's time to say, you know what? This one doesn't need to work, but this one, I think I can do it.
Yeah.
If it's about the inspiration. Wherever the inspiration comes from, you gotta see it through to the end and see what it does for you.
Yeah, I may actually try to rehabilitate a few of these then, because some of them, it used to be when I would go back and revise things, it was purely, where is the language really good? And I would go find the really good language, whether it had any emotional connection or relevance to the characters or not. If it was phrasing that was elegant and really strong, then, I wanted to keep it. And that was wrong-headed of me. What I've noticed, I just watched Everything, Everywhere, All at Once.
Yeah.
And have you seen it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I just saw it this morning. No, but it's a tremendous film, and it's really cool to have a story that starts off purporting to be one thing, and then it shifts hard into something else. And what I left that movie feeling surprised me. I was surprised that it had the emotional depth that it had. I'm surprised that it made me feel a certain way. And it really occurred to me that's the point of fiction. Now that's a visual medium, but you could have novelized that and had a pretty similar experience. So I think when I go back and do these revisions, what I'm going to be looking at is not the quality of the prose, because the prose was always good. It was just in service of very little. It was paper mache. It was window dressing. What I'm interested in is, did I pass over opportunities to take a deeper dive into emotion in the characters that existed? If the answer is yes, that I did pass over, I think I might revisit that. If the answer is no, it was just really clever, pretty writing that was in service of nothing, I'm probably going to put that, on the shelf and keep it there. Yeah. But that's what, and I've even gotten now, Tim, to the point where I'm like, what core emotion am I trying to express in this piece? Especially since you have really small pieces, like the ones I've shown you have been fewer than 1,100 words, both of them. And so I think to express one emotion well, almost like you're plucking a guitar string and you're listening to it go boom, right? And that 800, 1,200 words is that pluck of the guitar string, and it needs to, when you end, have that emotional resonance that people can identify. That is a very good place for me to begin, because it's different from the way I used to approach this.
Yeah. That's, then let me ask you this. With these pieces that you're bringing out and looking at and doing things, one of the problems that I have run into, and when I find myself to be at my most sort of depressed or frustrated as a writer, I find it's because I'm trying to work on too many pieces. What is your focus like? What is your scope like? Can you work on several pieces at a time? Or do you try and find one, and you have a good discipline to say, this is what's going to happen for the next amount, X amount of time, and then, and these others? Or are you like me and you end up like, what would be a good sentence in that thing that I wrote last Tuesday at 3:30? Yeah, that'll do that. And I'll go work over there, and then I'll go do this. And maybe after dinner, I'll just try that other thing.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I've been lucky enough to work on things that are small enough that I can complete them in a pretty tight window, whether it's a day or a little under a week. When you write short fiction, and you have that kind of momentum that comes from getting into a flow state, generally you can finish that complete movement, in one sitting. So the story I gave you recently has an interesting note about it. Remember, a long time ago, we talked about me doing this kind of math problem to try to figure out what my keepable words, would be. So for anybody who didn't hear that episode, basically I wanted to say, how long do I have to write in order to guarantee that I'll have X number of keepable words? And that'll give me a very simple divisible number that I can start to kind of plan my day. Okay, if it takes me this much time to create this many keepable words, then I can start kind of building a writing schedule that will get me to the finish line of a longer work in a reasonable time frame. So I actually have some numbers around that. The story that I wrote, which ended up being 837 words as a final thing, was 720 in its first iteration, and it took 57 minutes to write it. I was surprised at how quickly it flowed, because it was one of those things where I just sat down and said, I'm going to write today. And I didn't think about what, it was so weird, because I used to plan like, I'm going to do this particular thing and this character study, and like that crap didn't work. So I'm like, I'm just going to sit down at the Tandy 1000 TL and I'm going to listen to the fan blow over the processor, and I'm just going to start typing. Let's see what happens. And in 57 minutes, and I even got interrupted while I was having my son came in 4 minutes after I sat down, because I had put the timer on my phone. 4 minutes, and he's like, can I have lunch? And I'm like, yes. Yes, you can.
Yeah.
So I pause the timer, I go make lunch, and I come back, turn the timer back on. And if 57 minutes start to finish, I had a complete draft. And I was like, oh my God, that was amazing. How did that happen? So I thought at that point that it was perfect and that I was a genius and everything was great. Come back and read it again, and I'm like, short of genius. Okay, let's try this again. But I thought what would happen, Tim, I assumed incorrectly that when I would go back, that I would trim, cut, and that 720 whatever words would turn into, 200, 300, because that was my experience from the past. Instead, after I did and this is a revision, like really changing a lot of text and whatnot. My first revision took 30 minutes and the story was 730 words so I had added 10 words, but I had changed a lot of the text in the draft. So I'm like, my genius is finally revealed. So I left and took a break. I came back to it, I think 2 or 3 days later, read it again and went, short of genius. Okay, we can do this. And I did a second revision that was an hour. And I wasn't expecting to spend an hour on it. It was one of those things where I was like, I'll probably just go proof this. It'll be fine. And as I was reading it, I'm like, no, it needs more than proofing. So I'm doing a full-blown revision on it, and it turned into 840 words. So I'm like, okay, it's getting bigger. Like, that's very unusual to me for a story to get bigger when I would return to it. So the total time was about 2.5 hours. It ended up being 840 words. The final version was 837 because I cut one phrase that was unnecessary in the proofing stage. So there you go. And basically what I did was kind of work that out in words per hour. Basically 1 hour is 336 words. And I'm like, okay, well, if I'm going to write something longer, that's like 50,000 words, how many hours is that going to take me? And I'm like, okay, well, that's about 149 hours. Oh, okay. Well, how would I break that down if I did like 1 hour a day on average? So 7 hours a week. How do I break this up? And I got kind of a nice round number. But then I thought, well, no, because the first draft is actually shorter than the revision, if this is to be true. So what I came up with is that if I work for 60 hours, 60 hours, 1 hour a day on average, it'll take me 8.5 weeks, 8.6 actually, but it'll take me like 8.5 weeks to get a first draft. That'll be right under 43,000 words. Then in the revision, which takes me another 89 hours or 12.7 weeks, that'll get me from 43 to 50. So
could you give me a second? I just need to catch my breath.
I know.
I
mathified it for you. So the problem is solved. You can write down the answer. Cheat on your quiz. The upshot of all of this is I have a formula that I can apply to the way that I budget my time. And I don't know if it'll work. The whole point of this was to get close. So I'm going to try it when I get the courage to start a novel, which should be this year. Yeah. But when I get the courage to start a novel, I'm going to apply this and average 1 hour a day, every day, and plan to have my draft, within, basically it's about 5.5 months. And that seems reasonable from what I've been reading.
Now, let me take a sidestep into a couple questions about this because this is great. And I mean, you are going to write a 50,000 word novel because you have your blurb that you wrote. And I finally got an idea for my blurb today, for my 50,000 piece. So we'll have to share those so that we can, talk about that in a future episode. But let me ask you this. And this is really, I'm struggling with this and I can't imagine that I'm the only one, but you're talking about scheduling yourself for an hour every day. And let me ask you, on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that you can do that?
I'm easily at an 8.5 because I'm not scheduling an hour every day. I'm saying I want to average an hour every day.
Yeah.
So if there's a day where I'm sick and I can't get to it, or if there's a day where my family commitments, I just need to average 1 hour every day. And I was, just hacking around on the Tandy, and in 57 minutes I came up with a piece that was a full movement that I was really happy with. It had to go through loops and edits to get to where I'm comfortable showing it to other people. But just that first draft is just for me. So this is the other part of the equation that is essential. Those aren't perfect words. Those are words.
Yeah.
So I just need
Yeah.
words. And you don't want it to be like, the sky was blue. It was a dark and stormy night. The picture frame on the wall. Like, you want them to be story words. That's why when I would do NaNoWriMo, because I tried that a few years, and I was very excited. In the first couple days, I was hitting that average of 1,600 and change words per day. But I would always stumble. And as soon as you stumble and lose that momentum, the whole thing is shot. It's like running really fast and you fall down and you're like, well, I could get up and keep running fast, but I'm never going to catch the pack. So whatever, what's the point? Right. This way, if you're just averaging 1 hour a day, if I miss a day or even 2, I can make that up over the weekend by having just longer sprints. And so it's very attainable.
Yeah. And it's interesting for me because, you've been working at your position, at your job as a trainer for a while now, correct?
Yeah, I've been in this job for 2 years, but I've been in the role of training manager for nine plus, and I've been in learning and development for like 20 something. Yeah.
Well, this is something that I would really love to have your advice on, and this is what I've been sort of leading to about having the confidence with, kind of putting aside at least, like we were talking about, just trying to average about an hour a day. I've just taken a new position that I've never had before. I've sort of always been the tall, skinny, nerdy guy that got the keys to the building because he was afraid of getting in trouble. So I've done a lot of hiring and firing and counting the drawer down at night and running money to the bank and doing ordering, all that stuff. But this position here is a very bloated position in my life right now. So in other words, do you feel that you have that mastery of your work life so that you are confident enough to do an hour? And if you do have that, because you've sort of found a balance between your personal life and work, how do you do that? So that because right now I carry a lot of stress home with me and it lasts for 3 days, which is weird because I have to go to work the next day, but I'm still carrying 3 days worth of stress. So it's like I'm trying to find myself in a position to be a writer within the new context of having a new job. And I have to imagine that there are a lot of people who kind of have that, before. I've always sort of said to people, flippantly, because I'm a fucking idiot, like, all you got to do is you just got to find 5 minutes of time. What's that you say? You got a kid? Just wait until they go to sleep. What's that? You got a job? Just wait till you go to the bathroom. And here I am with a job that is I love the people that I work with. I love them. They're all, I consider them more friends than coworkers, but it's still, it's a big time suck on my mental space. Any advice?
Yeah, I have plenty, but I'm going to preface it with this. No one thing works for everyone. So I'll tell you what I do. And if you want to try it, great. And if it doesn't work, just discard it. But I do have a lot. I
swear to God, Art, if you tell me I got to come up with a math equation, I'm going to kill you.
I'll do the math for you. I will do the math for you. I love the math. No, the thing you have to treat whatever you're doing as your side hustle, whether it's writing or designing board games, which for me was the last 7 years or so, you've got to treat it like a second job. And you have to come to it with the passion and the commitment that you're going to do it, even if you're a little sleepy or even if you have other things going on. It's just going to occupy that space in your brain. So if you're a writer who's got to write and it's got to happen, and by God, it's going to happen whether I'm exhausted or not, then you're already ahead of the game. If you're trying to talk yourself into doing it because you think that's what you should be doing, that's where it's more like another job, and you may actually not be in a headspace to attack it. But if you're really passionate about whatever your side project is, and we're talking specifically about writing, but I can tell you from experience that I had a full-time job. My previous job, I was actually head of recruiting for the United States for a maritime company at the same time that I was the global head of training for the United States, Mexico, and Brazil. It was an enormous job. And I was still able to find time when I was not working to do board game design and development because I cared about it. I was passionate about it. I wanted to learn how to do it. So here are some tips. The first thing you can do is try to figure out how to not have downtime. And what I mean by that is any time that you're not working should be spent doing your side hustle, even if it's not at a computer doing the writing. So we all know that when you're commuting, that's a really good time to kind of multitask. When I would drive, my job was 40-minute commute. So on the way there, I would listen to podcasts about board gaming. And then on the way back, I would do the same. Sometimes I had a program on my phone that allowed me to use voice, and it would convert voice to text. So I would narrate about stories that I wanted to write, or when I had moved into board gaming as a discipline, I would capture notes on my phone that would help me accelerate my board game design. If I had an idea and I wanted to capture it, I didn't have to wait till I got home. The trick is to not wait. If you've got an impulse, figure out a way to capture it quickly so that you don't lose that spark of imagination, and you can come back to it later and develop it more fully. But if we just allow the sparks to kind of dissipate, and then we're like, well, when I get home, I'll do that when I get home. By the time you get home, you're tired and you won't have that spark anymore. So that's the first thing. You got to capture that brilliance in those flashes of brilliance, and make sure that any time that you have is purposed for your secondary activity. As if it were your primary job. So I think that's a big key. The other one is to actually carve out time to do the work. So I used to spend a lot of time over the weekends. I would spend a lot of night time doing this board game design, and now I'm appropriating that time to write. When I was younger, I used to wake up really early in the morning to give myself that 90 minutes of quiet, uninterrupted time. I'm a little too old now. I kind of need the sleep. But I've been waking up anyway. My daughter goes to school in Italy, and sometimes I'll wake up early because they're 7 hours ahead. The best time I can catch her is first thing in the morning for her, which is like 3 o'clock in the morning for me. So if I happen to be up, I'll text her, and then we'll have a nice chat. So what you're looking for is opportunities to repurpose your downtime into productive time. That's really the best way to say it.
Yeah. With your first point about the commute, that is something, living in New York City, I have a lot of commute time, and that is a really great space for me to do that. One of the things that I constantly have to remind myself is to look forward to it. Sometimes I have to mentally prepare myself throughout the day that it's almost like I'm going to have a treat, or it's almost like it's like taco night. You know what I mean? Like I wake up and I get ready, I go to work, I try to do a little bit of writing on the subway there, going to work. But then at work, if I can remember to tell myself, you know what, you're going to work on that scene that you were thinking about. Let's get ready for that and think that. That way it sort of mentally prepares me through the day that I've got this, oh man, I can't wait to look forward to this. I'm going to, I got a good 35 to 45 minutes of writing time where I'm going to be right hand on the subway pole and on the 7, left hand working the phone, but I'm still trying to do it, and so that's something that I have to constantly do for myself, because sometimes I get so sucked into the work that I can't turn on a dime and just go, okay, I'm out. Now I need to be a writer. I have to prepare myself throughout the day. I don't know if that sounds crazy.
No, it does. You've got to be able to compartmentalize. And I have a lot of experience doing this, so I feel really well suited to do it. You've got to be able to take something, put it in a box, and set it on the shelf, knowing it's important, but it's not important right now. And not everybody can do that. And even budgeting the time, this might work for some folks. If you are very busy at work, and obviously you're spending your workday working, and you have an expectation, or your boss or your job has an expectation that you will be on call in your off time, that's tough, right? Because I know that exists where you don't really have any off time. But I think you should give yourself permission to have off time. I know that there are articles out there that you can find on the internet that purposely talk about how disconnecting from work, especially if you're in a remote work situation, where I remember when I first started doing remote work, it was late 2009. I was lucky enough to work for a federal contractor, and I was based in Louisiana, but they were based in Virginia, and they were doing work for the federal government. And so all of my work was remote. So I was way ahead of the pandemic curve. I was doing remote work for like 10, 12 years before it hit. And so I learned how difficult it was to have easy, instant access to email. I used to say the best thing about my job is I can roll out of bed and I'm at work. The worst thing about my job, I roll out of bed and I'm at work. You know? So the challenge was having a dedicated space to do my work. And so at the time I was in a different house and I didn't have a room with a door I could close. So I set up a computer basically on our wet bar. I set up the computer. I'm like, I'm right next to all the booze. This is fantastic. But I would and again, I'm good at compartmentalizing, so I wouldn't drink on the job, but I was right next to it. So it's like, if you guys, if I get the wrong email, I'm hitting this off. No, but for real, it was tough because if it's 7, 8 o'clock at night and you hear that ding, if your computer happens to be on, there's a pull. You're like, well, who's emailing me at 8 o'clock at night? What is this? Yeah. And it might be people like we used to have to deal with people who are on halfway across the world. So they're in different time zones. So for them, it's the work day. And for you, it's not. Yeah. So anyway, just to fast forward to the end of this, you've got to be able to set aside time for you just from a mental health standpoint. And if you want to veg out and watch TV instead of write, watch TV, nobody's banging their shoe on the desk for you to create art. But if it's one of those things that's inside of you that you have to do it, you're compelled to it by an unseen force. If you're not writing, you feel like garbage. You feel like you've wasted that moment of your life because you haven't created art. Well, if you're one of those people, man, don't let TV get in your way. Just, find the time and do it. So compartmentalizing is the key, but you have to take control mental health wise. You have to take control over your time and you have to set boundaries. I think my daughter's generation, the Gen Z folks, are really good at this. They are exceptionally good at compartmentalizing and really downplaying the needs of the company or the needs of their employer, relative to their own personal needs. I think my generation, our generation, Gen X, I don't know, some are and some aren't. But I know for me, the pull is to be a really good employee because a lot of people depend on my earnings, right? So it's not just me, it's my family. So the thing about this is if you can compartmentalize and if you're passionate and committed and want to do the work, you'll find the time. But repurposing that dead time into productive time is one of the biggest keys.
Yeah. And I think that, I really need to speak to the opposite side of that because I am a horrible compartmentalizer. I carry shit with me all the time and I cannot. And that's where my struggle has been, as I've taken on this new responsibility because, it's a job that I took that I could help myself look toward my own future, hashtag healthcare. So as somebody that I can't compartmentalize, there are days when I am so disconnected from everything that's happening because I really, really wanted to write. I really want to have more writing. Writing is where I feel that I'm finally able to not just express myself, but to kind of work my own shit out. And it's such a nice therapeutic thing for me that it does feel like it's a scrape and it's a struggle and it's 3 sentences or 1 sentence. And so as someone who cannot compartmentalize, but is trying, I've really tried to be someone that's like, my work phone is off. They know that I'm not going to answer phones. It's over. I get home and then I'm just like, when do I go to bed? So the connective tissue between compartmentalizing and what you were saying and how I feel like I just slosh around like a day-old Slurpee that's just not, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like my insides, I just don't have a center. It's just not solid.
Well, I've got something for you then. And so maybe it is choosing the right level of effort when you do try to sit down and do something. Because when you sit down with nothing ready and the blank page is there and you just go, because you've talked about that and how that your improv background has allowed you that freedom to just go, which is great. But that takes a lot of energy. And so I'm not at all saying that every free 90-second interval you should just sit down and go. That takes
No.
that takes a lot of energy.
Yeah.
So editing something that already exists takes less energy, right? There's less of a heavy lift. And then proofing something that's close to complete takes even less energy. So I think that you really should target an activity that matches your energy level. And if it turns out that your energy level is too low to do the thing that you want to do, and you don't really, like if it's just a proofing level of energy, you're at 15%, and you're like, when is this day going to end? Then maybe go to bed. Sometimes I'll go to bed. As a kid, I used to go to bed at 5:30 in the afternoon. And there were a lot of reasons I did this, but when I was 14, 15 years old, I had a whole stretch of about a year when I would go to bed at like 5:30, 6 o'clock in the evening. I'd wake up at 1 o'clock in the morning, and I would do my homework from 1 until 6. And then I'd get ready and go to school and leave at like 7:30. And that took a toll on me physically. That's really not, I don't recommend that to people, but that was the way that I chose to compartmentalize. I wanted to have quiet, alone time to do my homework, and I needed that much time to get my homework done. So that's how I chose to kind of flex my schedule at 15, schedule to do this. So yeah, I mean, just choose the right level of effort. And if your battery is run down, you got to recharge your battery.
Yeah. And that's the most important thing. Like for me, I've tried to be in really, really nasty states, whether it's, feeling depressed or feeling down or feeling bad, and being like, well, now's the time to write. It's like, no, you know what? You're still going to need that self-care, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think it's sort of one of the things that I think I'm trying to get into a headspace of right now is, you know what? If I don't have a lot of time for writing right now, I'm trying to build that time. I'm trying to build the time as I adjust to this new job. For example, my bosses are very, very amenable to my taking actual breaks, which is great. Go unions, and taking walk-away lunches, an hour when I can get away. So I'm kind of in a very nice spot where I'm able to like eat lunch or take, eat some food at my desk, and then use those breaks as a way to either step away from the actual work to go get some fresh air, or during an hour lunch, hey, why don't I just spend 15 minutes reading a piece that's by someone that I respect, or a lit mag that I really, really enjoy, to get me amped up to try and get me into that mood to write. So I think one of the things that I've come out of this with is, you know what, maybe right now, maybe I'm not a George R.R. Martin giant novel epic writer. I can write shorter pieces. That's the time that I have for right now. And I think that's what's really helped me out, is like, I'm kind of cranking out these 200-300 word pieces and trying to edit them. And they're not, some of them are out there for submission, and I'll probably get them back and then realize, yeah, maybe I pulled the trigger on that too quickly, just so that I could feel like I was doing something with my life. But it's sort of, I'm kind of trying to adjust, but I think you've given some really great advice that I really kind of want to try.
Yeah, it's, I was thinking about it as an analogy of weightlifting, which I don't do, but I am aware of it.
It's Arnold Schwarzenegger. Got it.
Yeah. Well, I'm more the 90-pound weakling. Well, I'm not. I wish I were 90 pounds. No, I'm the fat guy in the corner who's like eating chips going, that looks heavy. So, but what I'm aware of is that when you start lifting weights, you should not start at a really high weight. You should start low and then build up to those higher and higher weights as you're lifting. In the same way, what you've described, writing shorter pieces so you can kind of build up your tolerance to get to the longer works, that's exactly what I'm trying to do. By just writing small pieces, 1,200 words or fewer, once I get comfortable doing that, I can start looking at, well, how can I tell a larger story? How can I have more than one emotion that I'm sort of expressing? How can I get two guitar strings instead of just one? So, I'm a baby steps here, but I'm happy with how it's working so far. And I think I'm working up towards novel length, and I have the formula to know that I could have the stamina to do it, marathon style instead of just sprinting. So, reps with lower weight is a good approach. But there's two other things I wanted to tell you about before we wrap up. One is I get a lot of satisfaction out of using dead time to prepare for those moments when you can really focus on the work, where you're alert, focused, you're in a good mood, you've got the time set aside. Maybe it's a Saturday and you sort of have a couple hours to yourself and you're like, I'm going to use this time. Well, Monday through Friday, you may have 5 minutes here, 8 minutes there. Lunchtime is usually a really good time. Like I said, the commute and whatnot. Or it could just be dead time where you're waiting for a meeting to start and you've got 6 minutes and you're like, well, what do I do with the 6 minutes? What I do with that time is I try to collect it, and I use that 6 minutes very purposefully. I pull up a document that I'm working on my phone, for example, that might have notes about a story that I'm going to do, or, really it would have been a game that I'm designing. And I would spend that 6 minutes trying to advance one thing. Maybe I'm going to write a sentence. Maybe I'm going to, make a note about an idea that I want to incorporate, but I'm thinking about the thing that I'm going to be creating later in small bursts, and I'm capturing all of that in my phone so that when it's time for me to sit down and do the real work, I can scroll through these ideas, and you wouldn't believe how many times I open up my phone, start looking at my notes and go, oh, damn, that's a good idea. Oh, when did I think of that? That's actually pretty clever. Like, who wrote this? So it's all this time, because if you wait to do it later, you're going to lose all of that creative spark. It's all about kind of collecting those sparks. Last thing is I used to do this trick where I would interview myself. And this doesn't work on the subway unless you want to get some looks, I guess. But I was in a car, and so by myself for 45 minutes at a time. So I could do this where I would pretend that I was being interviewed about the story that I was working on or the game that I was designing. And I would ask myself interview-style questions, and then I would answer them as the designer or the writer. And it was a great opportunity to figure out when I was full of shit, or figure out what I was really trying to say. And it was delightful. Have you ever done that?
Yeah. Sometimes I will be washing the dishes, or, hey man, I don't know how many times you've been to New York City, but if you're sitting there asking yourself questions and responding, it's just part of New York City. Nobody's going to bother you. Especially if you got Bluetooth on, man. You could just be sitting there with your earpods on, just be like, yeah, so I said to myself, what did I say? Yeah, so I really thought that the second paragraph. No, sometimes I will not interview myself, but talk about the story as if I'm trying to tell someone what it's about, so that I can kind of keep digging into what the heck I'm trying to say on the page, because sometimes I get a little bit too like, wow, man, this is what a great idea. This is fantastic. What's it about? Beats the shit out of me, And so that's a really helpful way for me to kind of get into what I'm actually trying to say. Hasn't worked yet, but it's a nice thing to try. One of the other things that I really want to try and do this year with the blurbs that we wrote about trying to get us to get to a novel size piece, I always was thinking I have to have a fully realized idea. I need to know the beginning, middle, and end, or else I can't start out. And I think one of the greatest things that I allowed myself to do, as we were talking about sort of building up a tolerance and writing, smaller pieces and gaining, is to write freeform. And that's kind of what I'm really looking forward to, is maybe seeing if I could write this 50,000 word novel on the train, in little pieces, because again, we don't want, as you said, we don't want just words, but if I can get myself to 50,000 words and then say, okay, what else does this need? I think that'll be a pretty fun thing to do. And that's what I'm hoping I can do this year, in little snippets of time on the subway or on break or in the bathroom.
Right.
Or while,
Yeah. Well, as long as you're using those fragments of time purposefully, then you're already ahead of the game, right? Instead of trying to sort of delay until you have the time, it puts so much pressure on your psyche when you're like, well, I can't do that now, I got to do it later. I can't do that now, I got to do that later. When later comes, there's all this pressure of, oh man, I've been putting off all this stuff. Now I've got to make this worthwhile. Yeah. And if it doesn't happen, then you're like, man, what?
I know.
Does that resonate with you?
Oh, yeah, it does. It does. And that's why I sort of talked a little bit about that in one of the refills we had, where it's like, sometimes I would be like, okay, 2 p.m. Friday, I am going to write for 3 hours. can't wait. And then it's like, it's different from what I was talking about earlier, where it's sort of like, okay, I got to get myself into the mindset of writing. This thing I would do, I'm going to be writing on Friday, going to be doing it for a couple hours. I would just get so like, can't wait to do it, can't wait to get there, and just building it up so much that I'd get there, and like the first 2 sentences or the first 10 minutes of writing would go wrong, or my son would come in and ask if I was going to feed him lunch, and I'd be like, are you kidding me? There are SpaghettiOs in the cupboard. I could never be a father, Art. I could never be a father.
You know, if you had to, you could, and you'd find it in you, I promise.